6 weeks after my sister moved back into our parents' house with a newborn that belonged to my wife, my father called me on a Tuesday night and asked if I had considered being the bigger person. I was standing in my kitchen in Barrie, still in my work clothes, pouring the same cup of coffee I had been reheating since noon. The mug had a chip on the handle. I had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. That is the kind of detail you notice when someone says something so absurd that your brain quietly steps out of the conversation to examine the nearest object. Being the bigger person, my sister Nadine had been sleeping with my wife for at least 14 months before I found out. My wife, whom I had married at 29, whom I had helped through grad school, whom I had driven to every single one of her mother's chemotherapy appointments without being asked. That wife. And my sister, Nadine, who had sat across from me at Christmas dinner, who had given a toast at my wedding, who had texted me 3 weeks before I found the messages to tell me I was the best big brother she ever had. The baby was 7 weeks old. A girl. My sister had named her Rosie. I had seen one photo, forwarded through my cousin without my permission. I said to my father, "I don't think that phrase means what you think it means in this situation." He sighed the way he always did, when he was hoping I would just absorb something quietly. "She's struggling, son. She didn't plan for any of this." Neither did I said. Funny how that worked out. He didn't have an answer for that. He never did. He just moved on to the next appeal. That was my father's method. He did not argue. He pivoted. He kept finding new doors until one of them opened. I told him I had to go and ended the call. I stood at the kitchen counter for a while, looking at nothing in particular. Then I poured the cold coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, and went to bed at 8:30 like a man who was done pretending that he still had something as useful to offer some. This is where I should explain how I found out, because people always want to know. It was not dramatic. It was not a confrontation scene with raised voices and broken dishes. It was a Wednesday afternoon in March. I came home early because a site inspection had been cancelled. My wife's car was in the driveway. Nadine's car was behind it. I did not think anything of it at first. They had always gotten along. I had considered that a good thing. I walked in through the side door because the front lock was stiff, and I kept forgetting to fix it. I set my bag down in the entryway and heard voices upstairs. Then I heard something else. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for 10 seconds. Then I left and drove to a Tim Hortons on Dunlop Street, and sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I am a site manager for a mid-sized construction firm. I spend my days making decisions about load-bearing walls and drainage systems, and whether a subcontractor's timeline is realistic. I am not a man who falls apart easily. I ran some numbers in my head. I thought about the previous 14 months in a very deliberate clinical way, the way you review a project timeline, looking for where the error was first introduced. Then, I drove back home, walked in the front door, and stood in the hallway until they both came downstairs. Nadine left without speaking to me. My wife sat down at the kitchen table and cried while I stood by the window and waited for something she said to feel like an explanation. None of it did. She told me it had started at my cousin's birthday party the previous January. She told me she had tried to stop. She told me she was sorry more times than I counted. At some point she said, "I don't know how this happened," and I said, "I do. The same way things happen when people decide what they want and stop caring about what they're taking from someone else." She didn't argue with that. I called a lawyer the following week. By May, the divorce was filed. By August it was final. I found out about the pregnancy in June from my mother. She did not lead with it carefully. She called on a Sunday and said, "I need to tell you something about Nadine and I need you to keep a level head." I told her to just say it. She said Nadine was pregnant, and the timing suggested it was from the same period. I sat very still on my couch. My dog, a 6-year-old shepherd mix named after a hockey player I am not going to name here, put his head on my knee like he knew. "All right," I said. My mother waited. "That's all you're going to say? What else would you like me to say?" She did not have an answer for that either. My family has a particular gift that I have been studying for 34 years. They are excellent at presenting other people's crises as shared emergencies that require my participation. My mother does it with a kind of exhausted tenderness. My father does it with logic, dressed up as concern. My sister did it her whole life, with a charm that made everyone around her feel responsible for her outcomes. Growing up, Nadine was the one teachers described as spirited. She was 3 years younger, funnier in groups, faster to make friends. I was the one who showed up on time. I was the one who called when I said I would. I was the one who at 22, drove 4 hours to help her move apartments, because her boyfriend at the time was, in her words, not reliable. I did not consider any of this a burden at the time. I considered it what people did for their families. What I did not understand until recently is that reliability, when it belongs to one sibling and not the other, becomes a resource the family quietly redistributes. I did not know that being dependable had a cost. I found out the hard way that in certain family systems, the word responsible is just a softer way of saying available for whatever the other one breaks. The baby was born in October. My parents had moved Nadine back into their house in Innisfil by then. My ex-wife had moved to Toronto. The divorce was done. My life was, structurally, tidier than it had been in months, which is a strange thing to say about a period of time that included learning your sister and your wife had been together. I had started going to therapy in September. Her name was Dr. Holt, and she had an office in Barrie near the waterfront, with a large window that looked out onto nothing in particular. She did not offer easy comfort, which I appreciated. She asked questions and then waited while I figured out that I had known the answer the whole time. That is a particular skill that I had not previously understood the value of. It was Dr. Holt who first used the phrase designated absorber. Not as a clinical term, just as a way of describing what I had been in my family. The person who absorbed the turbulence so the structure could keep functioning. The one whose steadiness was treated not as a personality trait but as a communal amenity. I had been the designated absorber my entire life. I just hadn't had a name for it yet. I was doing reasonably well by November. I had a routine work, the gym 3 times a week, dinner with my friend Hugh on Fridays. Hugh was an electrician who had known me since high school, and whose primary response to most of my updates was, "Yeah, that tracks," or "That's rough, buddy," both of which I found more useful than most people's elaborate sympathy. I was doing reasonably well until my mother showed up at my house on a Thursday evening, with a casserole dish, and a look on her face, like she was delivering news from a disaster zone. I saw the casserole first and thought it was just dinner. Then I saw her eyes. "I'm not coming in if this is about the baby," I said. She blinked. "I brought shepherd's pie?" "Mom." She exhaled through her nose. "Can I please just come in?" I stepped back. She walked in, set the casserole on my counter, and stood with her coat still on, which told me she was not planning to stay long. That was either good news or it meant what she had to say was going to be quick and significant. "Nadine is struggling," she said. I leaned against the counter. "Okay. She's alone with the baby most of the time. Your father and I help when we can, but we're not young and she's not sleeping and Rosie has been colicky for 3 weeks. That sounds very hard," I said. "For Nadine, and for you." My mother looked at me carefully. She was trying to decide if I was being sincere or strategic. The answer was both. "We think it would help if you were more present," she said, "not as anything formal. Just as family. You'd come for Sunday dinners. Get to know Rosie. Be a consistent male figure in her life since the man who actually fathered her is not in the picture," I said. My mother's jaw tightened. "That's a harsh way to put it. Is it inaccurate?" She looked at the casserole. "Rosie didn't choose any of this." "No," I said. "She didn't. Neither did I." A silence settled between us. My mother pulled her coat tighter without taking it off. "You have so much capacity for love," she said. "I've always known that about you. Even now I can see it. You're not a cold person. You're a hurt person. And there is a difference." That was a good line. Say almost said so. Instead I said, "What you're describing is not me being cold. What you're describing is me not volunteering to step into a role that nobody is asking my sister to fill." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're asking me to be a stable presence for a child whose mother is the reason my marriage ended. You're not asking Nadine to be more stable. You're asking me to compensate for her instability, again." My mother's eyes filled. She had very expressive eyes. As a child I had found this comforting. Now I understood it as whether I watched it pass. "I'm not going to Sunday dinners," I said. "Not right now." She left 40 minutes later with the casserole still on my counter. I ate 2 portions of it because I am not an idiot. I called Dr. Holt the next morning and relayed the conversation. She listened without interrupting, which was her primary skill. Then she said, "How did it feel to say no?" "Quiet," I said. "Like turning off something that had been running in the background for years." "Good," she said. And we moved on. The family group chat was called, with absolutely no self-awareness, "The Camerons." I had been muted on it since June and had left it entirely by September, somehow. I was re-added in November by my aunt, who approached digital communication with the confidence of someone who had never been blocked before. I noticed when the notifications started again. I did not respond. I watched. The messages were mostly logistics about Christmas at my parents' house. Then my cousin Felix chimed in. "Hoping the whole family can be together this year. That includes you obviously," and tagged me. Then my aunt, who ran a bookkeeping business in Aurelia and had a strike opinion about most things. "Family heals through presence, not distance, sweetheart." Then someone named in my phone only as Uncle Don wrote, "Babies don't stay small. You'll regret not being there." I kept watching. Then my sister posted. She almost never wrote in the group chat. She was a phone person, always had been. She wrote, "I'm not asking for anything from him. I just want him to know the door is open," which was, I will admit, a better move than I expected from her. It looked generous. It positioned me as the one keeping the door closed. It was elegant in the way that only people who have been charming their whole lives can manage without visible effort. I typed and deleted 3 different responses. Then I left the chat again. My friend Hugh called, that evening. He had been added to no group chats and had no particular investment in my family's peace process, which made him an ideal advisor. Your sister wrote that she's not asking for anything, I told him. Right after your aunt told you babies don't stay small, he said. Correct. Yeah. Hugh said that's coordinated, I thought so too. My cousin on my father's side, a woman named Betrayal who had always been reasonably straight with me, called the following week. She was not part of the group chat campaign. She called because she had actually spoken to Nadine directly and had some information she thought I deserved to know. Your sister is telling people you cut her off because you can't handle her having a baby, Petra said. She's not saying anything about your ex-wife. She's not mentioning how any of this happened. She's just telling people you went cold. I sat down on the arm of my couch. Of course she is. I'm not taking sides, Petra said. I'm just telling you what's being said so you can decide what to do with it. I appreciate that. She cried when she told me. I want you to know that. So you have the full picture. She's very good at crying. I know, I said. I've known her for 31 years. After I hung up I sat very still for a while. Outside it had started snowing. The first real snow of the season, the kind that sticks. I watched it come down through the window and thought about the version of me that existed in my family's current retelling of events. The cold one. The one who cut off his sister for no clear reason. The one who was letting a baby pay the price for his pride. That version of me made a certain kind of sense if you removed all the relevant context. My family was very good at removing context. They had been doing it for years, not maliciously, I think, more like a habit. A shared agreement that certain facts complicated the narrative, so those facts lived in a separate drawer that nobody opened at family dinners. I had spent 34 years extinct to drawer. I was no longer willing to. In January, I received an invitation in the mail. Physical mail, which should have been my first warning. My mother had beautiful handwriting and knew it. The card's cream-colored with a small embossed pattern along the edge. It was an invitation to Rosie's naming ceremony. Not a baptism exactly. My family was not particularly religious, but my parents' generation observed certain rituals for certain occasions, and a naming ceremony at the community hall in Innisfil was apparently one of them. The card said, "Your presence would mean the world to all of us." On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "She looks like you, a little, around the eyes." I stared at that line for longer than I intended to. I called Dr. Holt. I told her about the card. I told her about the line on the back. I told her I did not want to go, and also that I understood exactly why my mother had written what she wrote. "What do you think the goal was?" Dr. Holt asked. "To make the baby real to me," I said. "To make it harder to stay away. To introduce doubt." "And did it work?" I looked at the card on my kitchen table. "It introduced doubt," I said. "That's different from working." I decided to go. Not because of the doubt. Not because of the line about the eyes. I went because my mother had spent 3 months building a version of this story in which I was absent and unreachable, and I was not going to keep handing her the empty space to fill. I was going to show up and tell my own version, in person. With receipts. I texted my cousin Petra. She responded within 2 minutes. "Good. I'll be there. I'll stand next to you." The community hall was a low brick building on a side road off the main highway. The kind of place that hosted minor hockey banquets and retirement parties, and, apparently, naming ceremonies for babies who had arrived under complicated circumstances. There were about 30 people inside when I walked in. Folding tables, a card table with a coffee urn, a small cluster of balloons in yellow and white. I arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. I had learned from experience that arriving late gave the room permission to watch you enter. Which was a disadvantage, and arriving early required making small talk before you had your bearings. Which was also a disadvantage. On time was neutral ground. My mother saw me first. Her face did what it always did, relief wrapped in hope, wrapped in a calculation I had long ago learned to read. She came toward me with her arms open. I took a step back, not far, just enough. "I'm glad you came," she said, adjusting. "I know," I said. She searched my face for warmth and found composure. Which I knew was not what she wanted but was the most honest thing I had available. She recovered quickly because she always did. "Nadine is over by the windows," she said. "She'd love it if you said hello." "Give me a minute," I said. I found Petra first. She was standing near the coffee table, looking exactly as she had described herself on the phone, aware of everything, committed to nothing until it mattered. "She knows you're here," Petra said quietly. "Your mom texted her." Of course she did. I poured a coffee and waited. The room was doing the thing rooms do at family events, people clustering by loyalty and history, moving carefully around the known fault lines. My father found me after about 10 minutes. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. He also looked like a man who had been living inside someone else's emotional crisis for several months and was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. "Thank you for coming," he said. Sure," I said. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder and left it at that. My father was not a man of many words, which I had resented as a teenager and appreciated now. He knew when to stop, which was more than I could say for most people in that room. Nadine approached me about 20 minutes in. She was carrying Rosie against her chest in one of those fabric carriers. The baby facing inward, a small knit hat on her head. My sister looked genuinely exhausted, not performed exhaustion. The real kind. Dull eyes, dry skin, the particular flatness of someone who had been running on inadequate sleep for too long. She stopped in front of me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "Hi," she finally said. "Hi." Rosie made a small sound and shifted inside the carrier. Nadine's hand moved automatically, to support her back. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Nadine said. "I wasn't sure either," I said. Another pause. My sister looked at the floor. "I know you didn't do this for me." "No," I said, "I didn't." She nodded. She had always been quick like that. Quicker than people expected. "Is she healthy?" I asked. Nadine looked up, slightly startled that I had asked. "Yeah, she's good, colicky. But they said she'll grow out of it." "Okay," I said. We stood there in an almost comfortable silence, which was strange and specific to the particular intimacy of siblings, who no longer trusted each other but remembered what trust had felt like. Then my mother materialized at my elbow. "Why don't you hold her?" she said. Her voice was pitched just loud enough. Several people nearby heard it. That was not an accident. I felt the room orient toward us. My aunt, my uncle Don. Two of my parents' friends whose names I could never remember. All of them watching now, some more openly than others. My mother had her hands out slightly, ready to take the baby from Nadine and transfer her to me. It was a simple gesture. It was also a perfectly constructed trap. Accept the baby, and by tomorrow my mother would be telling the family that my heart had opened. That healing was possible, that Rosie had brought us back together. Decline, as in I was a man who refused to hold an innocent child at her own naming ceremony, in a room full of people who would remember it. I looked at Rosie. She had her eyes partly open, the unfocused gaze of a very new person who has no framework yet for any of this. She had dark hair coming in at the edges of her knit hat. Then I looked at my mother. "No," I said. Her face fell. "Sweetheart, no," I said again, "you don't get to use her as a prop." The room went quiet. Not completely, but enough. My mother's voice dropped. "This is not the place." "You chose the place," I said. "You mailed me an invitation. You wrote on the back that she looks like me. You arranged this room and this moment and this question. I didn't choose the setting. You did." My father, who had been standing a few feet away, said quietly, "Marg." My mother ignored him. Her eyes were filling. "I am trying to hold this family together." "I know you are," I said. "But you keep trying to do it by putting things on my side of the ledger that don't belong there." My aunt said from somewhere behind me, "He has a point, Marg." I turned around. I had not expected that. My mother looked at my aunt. "Helen, please." Helen, as it turned out, had apparently had a version of this conversation with my mother before. And had things she had been waiting to say in a larger forum. Helen was 3 years older than my mother, and had the particular authority of an older sister who had been patient for a long time. "You've been telling everyone that your son abandoned the baby," Helen said. "I sat across from you at Thanksgiving, and I heard you say it. But he was never the father. You're asking him to fix something your daughter broke." The room was very quiet now. Nadine's voice came from beside me. Small, but clear. "Aunt Helen is right." My mother turned to her. "Nadine, she's right," Nadine said again. She adjusted Rosie in the carrier. Her jaw was tight. "I made this happen. I don't get to ask him to clean it up. I've been trying to tell you that for weeks and you keep saying I'm too tired to think straight." My mother sat down on the nearest chair. It was an abrupt, inelegant movement, like something had gone out of her legs. My father moved to stand beside her. He put his hand on her shoulder. Then he looked across the room at me. "She's not his responsibility," my father said. "She never was. We should have said that clearly from the beginning." My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. She was not faking it. She was genuinely, completely undone. That almost made it harder. "I love you," I said to her, "but I'm not doing this." She nodded once, not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. That was probably the best I was going to get. I looked at Nadine. I did not know what my face was doing. I tried to make it neutral without being cruel. "I hope she grows up knowing the truth," I said, "not a version that makes anyone feel better. The actual truth." Nadine held Rosie's back with both hands. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm going to try." I believed her. Not completely, not in the way I once would have, but enough to mean something. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair and found Petra near the door. She raised her eyebrows. "You good?" she said. "Not particularly," I said. "But I'm done." We left together. In the parking lot the snow had come back, small and dry and persistent. I stood next to my truck for a moment, not quite ready to get in. Petra pulled her collar up against the cold. "Your dad surprised me," she said. "Me too. What are you going to do now?" I looked at the building. Through one of the windows I could see the yellow and white balloons. "Nothing," I said. "That's the whole point. For the first time in a long time I'm going to do absolutely nothing about a problem that isn't mine." She nodded like that made sense, because it did. I drove home on the highway with the heat on and the radio off. My dog met me at the door with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had no idea what I had just come from, and wanted dinner immediately, which was exactly what I needed. I fed him, I made eggs, I sat on my couch. I did not hear from my mother for 3 weeks. When she called, her voice was careful and smaller than usual. She did not try to argue anything. She said she had been thinking. She said she understood she had put me in an unfair position. She said she loved me and she was sorry. I listened to all of it. I said, thank you. I needed to hear that. And then I said, I need you to hear something too. I'm not going to be part of Rosie's life in any regular way. That is not a punishment. That is just the boundary I need to keep myself healthy right now. If that changes eventually, you'll be the first to know, but I need you to stop trying to change it on my behalf. She was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she finally said. It was not enthusiastic, it was not healed, it was just okay. But it was honest, and from my mother, in that moment, honest was worth more than warm. My sister and I have not spoken directly since the naming ceremony. She sent one message through Petra. It said, I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I just want you to know I understand why you can't right now. I read that twice. Then I replied through Petra, thank you, take care of her, that was all, it was enough. I went back to my regular life, which looked the same from the outside and felt entirely different from inside. Same job, same truck, same Friday dinners with Hugh, but I stopped carrying the ambient weight of my family's expectation. That is a harder thing to explain than it sounds. It is not a dramatic shift. It is more like a pressure you have lived with so long you stop noticing it was there, until one day it lifts, and you realize how much energy you were spending just standing upright against it. I kept seeing Dr. Holt. In March, she asked how I was sleeping. Well, I said, better than I have in years, actually. She nodded like she already knew. People ask me sometimes, people who know the outline of the story but not the details, whether I regret not being part of Rosie's life. Whether I think about what she might have been to me if things had been different. Yes, I think about it, more than I admit. But a possibility is not a debt. And love, real love, cannot be assembled from guilt and pressure and the convenient proximity of an innocent child. It has to come from somewhere honest, or it does not hold. I know what I was asked to do. I know why I said no. And I know that somewhere in Innisfil, there is a little girl growing up in a complicated story that I did not write and chose not to continue. I hope she gets to read the real version someday. I hope it is gentler than the one I lived through. And I hope, by the time she is old enough to understand any of it, her mother has become the persons I saw a glimpse of in that community hall. Steady and honest, and finally, fully, her own. That would be enough. More than enough.